myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past.
Good afternoon, welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. Pleased to say I've got Mick Lowe's back on the show. Good afternoon, Mick.
Hi, Steve. Okay?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good. Good to see you. And wow, what a difference a few weeks makes. I called you on the show last night when I announced that you were coming on. I said, lucky Mick's back on, because the fortune's definitely changed for Newcastle since you started making an appearance on this show. It's got nothing to do with anything else, Mick.
I'm not sure about that, Steve. All I do know is it's more evidence of this fantastic game, which some of us, maybe more than others, have fallen a little bit out of love with in recent times. It's a fantastic game, and you just never know what's around the corner, And I've come on here and said, there is no rhyme or reason as to how or whether they do survive Newcastle, and it's turned out exactly that way. I'll not deny the fact that I kept saying on here I thought it would go down to the wire. I thought it would go down to Sheffield United and Fulham last two games of the season. But if Fulham get beat again tonight, Newcastle are 3 points from safety with 5 to play. I mean, it's ridiculous. Literally only a matter of weeks ago, you were counting down time towards what looked like a perilous end to the season. Now, big fat cigar, and looks like we might be safe within a fortnight. So you just do not know what's around the corner with this fantastic game of football. As I say, it's to my mind not quite the product that it used to be, and we've had that, since we last spoke, with that ridiculous Super League business. But it's a great game. It's a great game.
Let's talk about that, Mick, because we're all sitting there, finishing our Sunday dinner, tuning into the three matches we've become accustomed to on a Sunday afternoon, Super Sundays, and then suddenly this news starts to break on the internet. And I mean, I think we all expected something. There'd been a play, a few months earlier, but it had been squashed, and then suddenly to hear that they've all decided to join this Super League. I mean, what was your thoughts?
Well, I wasn't surprised, Steve, and I think anybody who's worked within football and is a football fan and has been a football fan over the last 20, 30 years, it was always likely to be the natural progression from, Premier League to Champions League going into that ridiculous group fiasco where you play game after game after game after game, and it's all about money. And they want to get greedier, and they want to string it out even further. So I don't think the European Super League's anything new. I mean, it was interestingly, of all the comments that were made in the light of tail between their legs, football clubs coming out and saying, "Oh, we didn't really mean it, and we were just testing the water, and we realised we got it wrong." The big movers and the shakers, i.e., Barcelona and Real Madrid, showed no real contriteness at all. And Agnelli at Juventus basically said, "I still maintain it's a great idea, but it just wasn't the right time," which means it will be pursued again. My anger in all this, Steve, is because it affects us here in the UK and England, is that I can understand why Barcelona and Real Madrid, and to a lesser extent the Italians, pursue this thing on a regular basis, because they don't make enough money in their own domestic league. Our boys in the Premier League, it's the richest league in the world by far. They make millions upon millions out of, basically, week in, week out, playing in front of full stadiums of 40, 50, 60,000 people. Your Barcelonas and your Real Madrids go to the Lecces and the Oviedos of this world every other week. The Juventuses and the Inter Milans go to the Parmas and the Chievos. They go to small clubs. And then you go down the pecking order and you go to France, where their championship, their Ligue 1, is no better than our championship. But in this country, we've got it good. In this country, it's why every footballer in the world, mainly, wants to come to Britain, because it's an absolute mine of money, and week in, week out generates the sort of finances that only other European countries can dream of. And that's what makes it more unpalatable to me, that yes, let those other European nations come up with some sort of European Super League so that they can make themselves a few quid or make their leagues more competitive, because they're not, on top of everything else, Steve, they're not competitive. PSG win it every year in France. Bayern Munich win it every year in Germany. In Holland, one of 2 or 3 clubs win it every year. In Spain, one of 2 or 3 clubs win it every year. You know, we still throw up a Leicester. We still throw up competition between Manchester United, Manchester City, you know, Chelsea, Arsenal, whoever. You know, we still have competition. But on top of that, we have millions. So for these, I don't know best how to describe them, this alleged big six in the Premier League. You know, greed isn't a big enough word for the way that they behave, because they've got it good here. They've got it really good here. They've got a good product. They've got a good league. They've got great supporters. This is the country that gave football to the world, and yet they decided to follow the Spaniards and the Italians. For what? A few extra million. I mean, it was disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. The fact that they didn't just say, right, okay, you do what you want. We've got a good product here. And we've messed fans around enough, you know, bearing in mind, you know, Saturdays, Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. Obviously, COVID hasn't helped. But, you know, I think the way that the English clubs behaved was absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, I mean, a few of the big guns as well in the Premier League offices were showing up to, to be the people that we knew they were when this Premier League stopped our takeover, you know, from progressing or made it difficult, shall we say. And I mean, a lot of people feel that that's going to be a positive moving forward if it does go down the legal route with Newcastle's takeover, that the likes of Masters and Hoffman will be held to account. And I think Hoffman has suddenly become more noticeable, I think, after this as the villain of the piece. He was brought in. That's when the red flag started to show, and ultimately that's been the big bollard in PIF's way. Hoffman.
I agree with that to a degree, Steve. But I think, as I've said on here before, I still think there's a big stumbling block between the TV people and the Premier League and Newcastle United. I just think that until those in the Middle East get the house in order in terms of televising Premier League games and giving due regard to the official broadcasters, so to speak, it'll always be a stumbling block. It'll always be a stumbling block because for the very reasons I've just said. You know, there is a fantastic product in this country. You know, whether we like it or not, Steve, if we cast our minds back to, you know, we talked about the game at Leicester back in 91, 92. You think about football then and think about what Sky and the Premier League has done for football in this country. You know, it's revolutionized it, and it's been Sky's money. You know, whether you like it or not, it's been Sky's money. And if a takeover of Newcastle United involves people who have done the dirty on Sky and the millions and millions of pounds that Sky have injected into the Premier League, you've got a problem.
Well, Mark asks the question, how would Mick like to see the English clubs punished? Should there be some punishment? And if so, what would you like to see?
Absolutely, 100%. As much as anything, I heard somebody make a very good point about, you know, these chief executives, these movers and shakers at these Premier League clubs are the same people who sat in on negotiations between Sky and the Premier League to come up with the television deal. So they know all the intricacies. They know all the details of the deal. And they've basically gone away to prospective broadcasters, because that's what this is all about. This isn't about a European Super League. This is about the broadcast rights to the European Super League. Because at the end of the day, it's unrealistic to think that 60,000 people are going to bowl up in the Allianz Arena to watch Bayern Munich against Arsenal on a Tuesday night. The vast majority, millions, will watch it on either a designated TV company, a subscription TV company, the internet, if football ever gets their internet rights rules sorted out, or some other form of broadcasting. That's what it's all geared to. They know that people aren't on a Tuesday night going to jump on a plane and watch their team play in Madrid or Juventus or Milan or Germany or wherever. They know this is all about fans watching the game on the TV. And these people at these Premier League football clubs have basically, it's almost like insider trading. They've gone to other companies saying, hey, we were in the meetings with Sky. We know that this is what the deal is. We know that this is what it's going to cost you to broadcast Premier League games with Sky. Now come to us in our European Super League and we'll do you a deal with this. So the people who really should be punished, and it invariably ends up being the supporters, shouldn't be the supporters. How you get around that, I don't know, Steve. But certainly, if you're a fan of the alleged Big Six, your team, to my mind, shouldn't get a 30-point deduction or a 10-point deduction or a 15-point deduction, because that doesn't punish the football club necessarily. That punishes the supporters. So get rid of the chief executives, get rid of the movers and shakers, find some way of coming up with a punishment that hits the football clubs, maybe hits them financially more than anything else, but don't punish the supporters, who invariably are the ones who suffer.
Maybe make them all take the owners and directors test again.
Whatever. Hey, the owners and directors test. I mean, what's all that about? What's all that about? I mean, that's been a farce for years and years now. I mean, it's almost. I mean, here we are laughing about it, and all you've done is mention the name of it. I mean, without going into it. No. Let's not go there. Let's not go there.
Yeah, okay. Let's turn it a little bit towards Newcastle. Paul Oxley, he basically wants to know, just regarding the takeover, he says, what do you think will happen to Newcastle under Mike Ashley if the takeover doesn't go through?
Answers on a postcard, Steve. Answers on a postcard. Because if there's anybody out there who has got any semblance of an idea of what goes on in Mike Ashley's head, please give me a ring. Because from the day he arrived at St James's Park, I have had absolutely no idea, and I defy anybody out there to tell me that they have an idea of how he operates. There's no logic involved, Steve. There's no logic involved. If you go on, again, we've had this conversation before. If you come at it from the business point of view, if you come at it from the point of view that he's just in it for the money, why would you jeopardize your Premier League future as he does, season in, season out, knowing that the Sky money could go down the pan? It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. So, while he's at the football club, I'm afraid the bottom line is we will sit and scratch our heads. That's all we will do. We will wonder what he's going to do next. We will try and get our heads around what he's doing. We will try and get our heads around, is there a plan? Is there not a plan? Is he selling it? Is he not selling it? Honestly, no idea whatsoever what that man is going to do and is going to do next.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Mike Ashley's inside of his head is anything like the inside of his shops, then God help us all.
Full of socks?
Full of socks, yeah. Full of socks and completely disorganised. You can't find anything, but it could well be. Look, I called you Lucky Mick at the start. What a turnaround it's been since we had you on a couple of weeks ago. I mean, like you said, we were scratching our heads thinking, where's the next point coming from? But Brucey's managed to get the dressing room sorted, and they've got the pitch sorted, and we've climbed up the league.
By hook or by crook, Steve. By hook or by crook. I mean, I'll give you and me a little bit of credit in the way that we shouted from the rooftops about Richie. We shouted from the rooftops about Murphy. Kept banging on about why isn't Willock starting games. But then again, maybe little old Joe's a super sub. Maybe he's the omen.
Yeah.
What I do know is that, and there is some element of credence in Steve Bruce saying, you had to wait for us to get our big players back. You had to wait for Callum Wilson and Joe and Almiron and blah 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 blah.
ASM Wilson. Yeah.
Some maximum to come back. But actually, in the scheme of things, we mentioned Richie, we mentioned Murphy, but the two boys, to my mind, and I mentioned one of them maybe a month ago, who should get a huge amount of praise and could well be seen as the saviours of this season, are Jamal Lascelles and the aforementioned Joe Willock. Because between them, they've scored 5 goals, which have either won a game for us or drawn a game for us. They have been the unsung heroes. Joe Willock and Jamal Lascelles are responsible for a huge number of these points. And as a result, we've gone from, 2 wins in 21 to 1 defeat in 8. And those 2 kids have been responsible for an awful lot of it. I would throw in, as I said, Murphy. I would throw in Richie and his contribution, but also Dubravka as well. I think there was a time when he first came back in, I think we could have tossed a coin and said 50 heads Darlow, tails Dubravka, and there wouldn't have been an awful lot of argument on a lot of people's part. But since he's been in, and since he's made the spot his own again, he's been very, very good, and has saved the day on more than one occasion. So, as I say, while everybody goes on about Joe Linton to a lesser extent, but St. Maximum, Almiron, these sorts of players have played second fiddle to the unsung heroes, and it's been the unsung heroes that are going to keep Newcastle up.
Again, it was a big decision that Bruce had to make. I remember going through that whole period where Darlow and Dubravka, it was harsh on Darlow, he hadn't let us down, etc. All those conversations, but being proved to be the correct decision, and it was a hard one for Bruce to make.
Yeah, but even then, Steve, I don't know. It's a fantastic game. Trying to apply logic to football, and are these the same players? That once upon a time couldn't win a game to save their lives. Have they changed as players? Has their attitude changed as players? Has Bruce changed tactics dramatically? And the answer to a lot of those is no. He hasn't done anything particularly different. The players aren't doing anything particularly different. Yes, as I say, he's got St. Maxim back, and he's got Callum Wilson back, but they've been bit part players in this run of 1 defeat in 8. They haven't been the difference at all. I mean, Callum Wilson's barely kicked a ball since he's come on, and we should be grateful he stayed fit, because I was one of the ones pushing for maybe bringing him back, not necessarily early, but gambling a little bit on it. So I got that wrong. But the rest of them have rallied round. You can't even argue that they've had easy fixtures, or they've had fixtures against teams that they should beat, because West Ham are desperate to finish in that top 4. That was a really big win. Liverpool are desperate to put this whatever it is behind them. They're desperate to beat Newcastle. Even the likes of Spurs at St James's. You think you're going to do really well to get a point out of this, and get a point out of it. It did, and suddenly that momentum builds. It's like going back to Keegan's favourite saying about we've started pushing a snowball down the hill, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. And as it is now, I don't see any way at all. And if Chelsea do lose, if Fulham do lose at Chelsea later, it'll be 3 points, and 3 points from 5 games. Not even Newcastle United could cop that up. I'm sure.
No, definitely not. Jeff's asking how much influence has Graham Jones had on this. I mean, he's clearly come in, and Bruce has acknowledged him as well. I think a couple of weeks ago at his press conference, he finally said, he's come in, he's been the right piece of the jigsaw. But he did say that he wasn't first choice.
No, and this is the problem that you have. At the best of times, even without COVID, where the communication has really broken down, because there just isn't that connection between journalists and football clubs and the general public. Everybody's sort of at arm's length from one another. So there was rumor and counter rumor about Jones. Was he Bruce's man? Wasn't he Bruce's man? At one point it was, well, he's obviously been brought in to take over the reins as and when Mike Ashley gets rid of Steve Bruce. And these all proved to be wide of the mark, and then there was the how good is he? Do they get on? I mean, I talked about a couple of games I watched where I didn't think the body language was at all good between the pair of them. But clearly, credit where credit's due. There seems to be a suggestion. We don't know, Steve. We don't know what sort of a difference he's made on the training ground. We're not privy to what's going on the training ground. But as a layman, if you looked at it and you say, right, okay, that was the point at which results picked up, was when he got involved. And if Steve Bruce is prepared to admit that, and it's not an easy thing to admit, Steve, for a manager who's under pressure to say, this guy's made the difference. Because you're basically saying, yeah, I still haven't got a clue, but he's the one who's made the difference. Now, I don't believe that's the case either. I've said throughout all of this, you know, whatever you think of Steve Bruce, just go on results. Just go on results, because he'll take it. He'll take it that as a manager, he's judged by his results. But don't get personal. You know, in these sort of what this to me has proved again is, for those people who got personal with Steve Bruce, all of a sudden they're left with egg on their face. You know, they are left holding the baby, and you know, there's no way back for them. You know, you've got to be very careful. You can't start falling out with people, and you can't start getting personal in terms of abuse with people just because they're results of games of football, you know, because they can turn. Whether you like it or not, they can turn, and they have turned. Now, how responsible Graham Jones is, we don't know, but you would have to think that because of the upturn in fortunes, he has had an influence of some description.
Yeah, Fungo says he watched a Sky upload the other night. He said it was the greatest Premier League goal, and they said what came out on top was Papiss Cisse against Chelsea. Obviously, that one where he was like a cross-come shot which flew into the top corner. He says, I remember your commentary. How did you feel when you watched that?
Well, do you know why I remember the commentary, Steve? Because I didn't have a clue what to say. Honestly, there are times in matches where you see things and your mind can't work quickly enough, and it can't respond to something that it's seen because it's never, ever, ever seen anything like that before. And I've never seen anything like it since. And I think I just sort of screamed Cisse, because it was just the most bizarre. I mean, he had a habit, Papiss, of scoring. I remember one goal he scored at Swansea, which was easier to describe. But I don't know if people remember this. I think we won 2-1 or 2-0 away at Swansea. And second half, at the end to the left, he's sort of falling backwards, and he managed just to lob the keeper. And it went in. And you're like that. I can't believe it. But the two, don't forget, there wasn't one at Chelsea. There were two at Chelsea.
Two.
They were both contenders for goal of the season, goal of the decade, but also contenders for what the fuck was that? Honestly, it was they were absurd. The goals that kid's. Remember that there was another one against Southampton at St James's. It dropped over his shoulder and he volleyed it from about 40 yards and it went in. And again, you went, what the fuck? You know, it was, and honestly, the best thing about him was he was the loveliest man in the world. I remember doing an interview with Papiss, and I sat him down, and his English was getting better. And I said, and he was sending all his money home to his family in Senegal, which was, you know, the larger family was about, God knows, 40 or 50 people. And I said to him, what would you have been if you hadn't been a footballer? And he said, a fisherman. All my family are fishermen. And he would have got in a boat every morning and gone out into the Atlantic Ocean, fished, come back, made money, and given his money to his family. He was the most extraordinary fella. Devout Muslim, used to get down. People remember he got down and prayed before every first whistle. Absolutely fantastic man, but scorer of the most unbelievable goals. I was never sure if he knew what he was doing, to be honest with you. I mean, the one at Chelsea, I think he just hit it. I think he just hit it, you know? Brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant.
It was, yeah. But it wasn't a bad period that either, because Demba Ba came in as well. It was that, you know, we weren't sure whether they were going to gel and was he going to have, you know, was there going to be a bit of competition? Yeah. But I mean, we were lucky, weren't we? I mean, it wasn't a bad spell of forwards.
Funny story, because I was telling this story the other day, Steve, about Demba Ba and Papiss. When I used to do the talk-ins, the favourite question amongst the crowd, male and female, you must have had this. Who's the longest in the shower? Who's the longest in the shower? Bearing in mind we're in Ramadan, this is what sparked the conversation I had with somebody the other day. I said I was doing this thing at the Fed Brewery with Pardew, and we used to do the first half, just me and him talking. Then at halftime break, you know the format.
Yeah.
Send your questions up. So we're sitting at halftime going through the questions, and I knew it was coming. It's always longest in the shower. So I said to Pardew, I said, look at this one, and it said, table 15. Who's the longest in the shower, Papiss or Demba Ba? And I said, look at that. And he went, do me a favour, ask me that. I said, are you sure? He said, yeah, ask me that. So we started up the second half, and I said, right, these are the questions. Question 3. Oh, here's a good one. I said, table 15 wants to know who's the longest in the. And as soon as you say the words longest, the whole room goes quiet. Who's the longest in the shower? Papiss, Cisse or Demba Ba? And now the murmuring's going, oh, bloody hell. They're going like. So Pardew says, there's a story. And that picks them up even more. They think they're going to get some. So Pardew says, the answer to that question, and they all go quiet again. The answer to that question is, I've no idea, he said, because as Muslims, they wear their underpants in the shower. And the room went, oh, God, you're joking.
Classic, absolute classic. I mean, just touch on Pardew, because I've never spoken to you about him. How did you find him? Because, you know, there always seemed to be mixed opinions of Alan Pardew, and I think when we look back, I think certainly when we've been watching what's gone on with managers we've had since, people often think better the devil you know. I know you've used that on occasions when we've talked about other things, but what was your overall impression of Alan Pardew?
Well, I won't lie because. And I won't lie because it got me so much stick when I was there. I mean, I got called worse than shite for defending the guy. I liked him, you know, and and there are people who just won't see it. But I had a knowledge of him because when I was in London, I worked with him during Palace getting to the 1990 Cup final. So we had a lot to do with Crystal Palace when they played Man United in the Cup final, because they were the London team. We were the London radio station at Capital. So we did a lot with them, and they were a great set of lads. And I hope we'll talk about the entertainers later. But they were very similar in many ways. They obviously weren't as good a team as the entertainers at Newcastle, but they were a band of brothers. They had Wright and Bright up front. They had Nigel Martin in goal. They had Andy Gray in midfield. They had John Pemberton. They had Richard Shaw, Eric Young, Eddie McGowan. They were a really tight unit, and they were a great set of lads as well. Really nice set of lads. And he was one of them. I must admit, he was probably one of the more sort of like Jack the lads, but he was a decent guy. And he was also somebody who played non-league football up until about the age of 20, 25. And he talked about going, you know, playing. I took him to Whitney Bay one night in front of about 50 or 60 people when Whitney Bay were doing well in the Vars as usual. Because he'd played in the Vars. He played in the FA Vars for, I think it was either Whitefleet or one of those sort of non-league clubs in London. And he talked about how much it meant to him. He'd finished a day on the building site, and then he'd play non-league, and they got to the FA Vars semi-final, I think. And he went along, and Paul McElduff, the chairman, who I know very well, you know, and they loved it. They loved it. And every time, Steve, every time I took him out into the community to do these talkings, people saw the real side of him. Everybody else seemed to judge him, you know, judging a book by its cover, as they say, you know.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know, let's cut to the chase. He got Newcastle United fourth in the table, and okay, he had good players, but they bought good players. They didn't buy Joe Linton. They bought Yohan Cabaye. They bought Demba Ba. They bought Papiss Cisse. Papiss Cisse was a signing from nowhere. Freiburg in Germany. No one had heard of it, you know.
Yeah.
He put together a good team that finished fourth, got us into Europe. And I'm sorry, in the same way that, you know, people had a go at Steve Bruce because his results were bad, you know, Alan Pardew's results were good. And you should give credit where credit's due. So I never had a problem with it. Yes, he was a little bit flash. Yes, he was a little bit arrogant. But I'm sorry, if you don't like people in football because they're flash and arrogant, I'm afraid you and about 5 others will have a drink in the quiet corner of the snug somewhere, and that'll be the sum total of your experience of football, because everybody has an ego in football, some more than others. But, you know, he was a decent guy, and he did very, very well for Newcastle. And I'll stand by him. And I'll tell you what he did that will be to his eternal credit. He managed to put one over on Ashley because he managed to get out before he was sacked. He basically turned around and said, I'm going back to Crystal Palace before you give me the heave-ho. And I'm not particularly liked by about 60% of the population of Newcastle. So see you later.
Yeah, I've got to be honest. I mean, I never campaigned against him. I was in that camp of better the devil you know. We've got to remember that under Ashley, he's still the manager to give us our best season. But yeah, I understand it. I understand. I mean, Stu in the chat there saying he absolutely hated Pardew. Another
Yeah,
disastrous Ashley appointment. Would have been Pardew out daily if this show had existed then.
yeah.
But yeah,
I mean,
it's all down to opinions, isn't it?
absolutely. And we are sitting here, you and I, at a time when there is a social media boycott going on in football, and a lot of that is because abuse and the way that people behave online is cowardly. It's cowardly. But I can remember, every Sunday I'd meet the lads, and you'd sit there and you'd scream and bawl. You'd have a proper argument, and during Pardew's reign, they were proper arguments, and people didn't like it. But they went away saying, right, okay, if Mick Lowe's, likes Alan Pardew, then you have to respect somebody for their opinions. It is all about opinions. What social media allows people to do is just, as I say, be cowardly and just abuse people without backing it up with some sort of argument. I backed it up basically by the fact that I met the guy probably about 5 times a week for about 3 years. And I think I had a better knowledge of his and understanding of him as a person than most people did. But I was in a privileged position to do that. But I didn't turn around and say to people, your opinion is better than mine. It's like Steve Bruce all over again. It's about what people think and what people make of people, and no two people will ever have the same opinion.
Yeah, Dave Harrison saying, "What do you think of the social media boycott?" I mean, I've decided to do it. It's one of those things. It's just making a stand, isn't it? It's a way of backing up everybody else who's doing it. I don't think it's a bad idea, and it gives you a bit of a break as well from the routine of going on. But I mean, what do you think of it, Mick? Is it?
Well, I use the word there, Steve. Cowardly. I mean, that is my bottom line on it. It's cowardly. I did an article a few. Probably months ago, maybe even further back than that. When I was a kid and when you were a kid, and even up until quite recently, if you wanted to interact, if you wanted to get involved in discussions about football, there were only really 3 ways if you wanted to put your opinion over. You either rang a radio station and had the balls to go on air, and bearing in mind they got your number then, so they could trace you. So you had to be respectful, or you certainly had to make your point in a proper way. So you could phone the local radio station. You could write a letter to the Cron or write a letter to your local paper. But again, that involved physically sitting down and, putting your point over and putting it over as well as you possibly could, and sending that letter, that physical letter, to the paper. Or, as I've just mentioned there, you can go down the pub or go to school, or you can go whatever, and physically front up and give your opinion, and run the risk of somebody smacking you on the nose or agreeing with you or arguing with you or begging to differ or whatever, all the things that I've done and you've done over the years. I haven't phoned in a radio station, but I've been on the other side of the microphone with radio stations. I've never written a letter to the paper, but plenty of people have. But all 3 of those things, Steve, and they were the only 3 ways that people once upon a time could vent their spleen, made sure that you fronted up. You had to front up. You either had to be in the pub with your mates or your non-mates or whoever, or you had to sit down with a pen and paper, or you had to pick up the telephone. This way of venting your spleen, social media's way of venting your spleen, allows you to be a keyboard warrior and just sit there and fire off shite, fire off nonsense, fire off disrespectful, rude, terrible stuff without any comeback, without any you don't even these people, I don't think these people even question themselves. So in that respect, it is, as I say, cowardly. But how do you stop it? It's almost impossible to stop it. And yes, it's a nice idea what they're doing this weekend, and yes, they're drawing attention to the fact, but it's not going to stop. It's It's asensical. It's illogical. There's nothing that logically allows you to think, right, if we do that, we'll stop it. people will always do what people are able to do. And while the system allows people to fire off tweets or fire off emails or fire off whatever without any real question against it, then it's always going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Sad but true. I'll just give a shout out to the sponsors. Big thanks to Spider VPN, who've been with us the last 3 months and have agreed to come on again next month as our one of our main sponsors. A big thanks to Gareth and Nathan and the lads, and also a big shout out to Arcot Interiors, who've been a main sponsor for this month. You can find them at www.arcotinteriors.com. Inquiries at arcot.org.uk, or give them a ring at 0191 265 8663. That's Arcot Interiors for all your kitchen needs. And qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Walls and Newcastle, and also to Jab Signature. Big shout out to them as well. If you're a first time visitor to the channel, hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right hand corner, and that's it. You subscribe and hit the like button, which is the little thumb up, which does us a favour, and click share as well, which shares it out to your social media. But don't do that over the next couple of days if you're on a social media ban. Otherwise, you'll get probably bullied by people saying you're breaking your own ban. And drop in a comment. There's always plenty of people in the chat, and you can get your points up on the screen. And let's talk a little bit, Mick, about the entertainers, because tomorrow night on Sky, I was a bit surprised it's only half an hour, but there is a tribute to the entertainers. I'm looking forward to that. What's your memories of that era? It was a fantastic time to be alive, wasn't it, as a Newcastle fan?
Yeah, I mean, too many, Steve, in many ways, and like you, I'm interested. I'm interested to watch it as much as anything, because I'm thinking, how on earth do you get all that into half an hour? You could probably do a couple of hours. I was thinking before we did this today. The word that sprang to mind, having used the word coward for the keyboard warriors, the word I would use for my part in the entertainers and that era would be privilege, absolute privilege. I've heard a lot of broadcasters say during the COVID times that, it's been a privilege and how fortunate they've been to be in the stadium and watch the games. And yes, there is a certain amount of that, although I have to say, the majority of the games I've seen, I wouldn't describe it as a privilege to have to watch some of that nonsense. But the word privilege was very definitely the word I would use in terms of being in and around that scene and in and around those players and that football club at that time. Because if I think to myself, I used to be able to, go down to Maiden Castle, to Newcastle's training ground or St James's as whatever, 2-3 times a week, and sit on the step with Kevin Keegan and talk to him. If that's not a privilege, I don't know what is. That is, and at the time it was maybe it's one of those things you maybe don't appreciate because you're doing it as a job of work. But the more I reflect on it, and the more the way that football's gone, the way football's gone, to the hundreds and hundreds of times we sat on a step with a tape recorder and talked about this, that, and the other. It's, it is privilege beyond privilege. I always say to people, when you meet the great ones, they have that aura about them. Shearer's got an aura about him. I was once sent to Italy to interview Ayrton Senna. I once went to America to interview Joe Montana. The Montanas, the Sennas, the Shearers, Keegan's right in there. When you sit with them, it's like they've got a force field around them, and you don't know what it is, and you don't know how it works, but they've just got it, and you hang on their every word, and it was such a fantastic time because of the man he was. Again, I posted a picture in the week about the famous John F. Kennedy quote about, yes, one person can make a difference and everybody should try. And I posted a picture of Keegan alongside Ashley. And you look at two individuals, and that's all they are. They're individuals, they're people. But the difference that they have made to a football club is palpable. One has destroyed it, and one was the savior of it. And that's what it was all about. The entertainers and Keegan, it was almost mystical the hold he had over the place, the fact that also the fact that, you know, I thought to myself, was this a reflection of society at the time, or was it a reflection of those as individuals? And I think it was probably a bit of both. But every one of those players, Steve, were great lads. I mean, you've met them all, you know, and you've done talkings with them. But from Xhaka and Pav through to Ginola, you know, the Pedros, the Beardsleys, the Clarkies, the Peasies, Darren Peacock to Stephen Howie, they were all great guys, you know, good guys, real good guys. And it was, you know, they never took it for granted. That, you know, they went out with the right attitude. They were playing for a nation. They were playing for a city. Fantastic times. I just hope that they do it justice tomorrow night on Sky, because believe me, it was a special time.
I mean, it's 25 years. I mean, that's a bit of a wake-up call to us all, isn't it? When we hear it was 25 years ago since that infamous rant. But I mean,
yeah.
What did you feel when you saw Kevin do that? We've discussed that this week on the show already, and I felt proud in many ways at the time, looking at him thinking he's one of us, heart on the sleeve kind of thing. But I think when I look back on it now, my memory of it now, and I think, God, that was a meltdown. That was Alex Ferguson finally, you know, managing to crack, Kevin's mental state really during that run-in.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with that, Steve. I don't think there's. I know exactly what you mean, and I know, you know, that maybe. And I had a couple of experiences with Kevin late on where, you know, it was clearly getting to him. I remember a famous time. I went down to Maiden Castle. It was all getting a bit. This was towards the end. You know, this wasn't 95, 96. This was 96, 97. And I remember making the mistake. It was the sort of statement that probably only a stupid reporter would make. But he was talking about this, that, and the other. And because I felt really part of it, and I felt almost part of the inner sanctum. I made the mistake of one of my favourite sayings is, familiarity breeds contempt. And I've always been somebody who's a big believer in you should never be too familiar with people. And we did an interview and he was clearly, you know, struggling. And I said something like, but surely the answer isn't to walk away. And he just walked off. He just literally left me as if to say, don't tell me what I should and shouldn't do. And I always remember within about 2 minutes, Terry Mack came out the corridor where the dressing rooms were, where the staff trained and the staff changed and met at Maiden Castle. And he came out and he looked at me and he went, you've upset him. And I suddenly thought, oh, that's all right then. Because I honestly thought I'd fallen out with him properly. But yeah, heart on your sleeve just doesn't do it, Steve. Heart on your sleeve doesn't do it. You know, the man was carrying the weight of an entire Geordie nation, bless him. You know, he wanted it so badly. And you do things like that, you know, like he did at Leeds when you want it. I remember, I don't know, I was trying to think this morning because I knew we'd talk about this, but I was with Mick Martin at the time because I was at Metro. And I can't remember, I think we'd given somebody a lift to the game. But either way, if you know Elland Road, there's a pub across the road from the ground, you know? We were in there at about 10:30, 11 o'clock. I'd done all my interviews, I'd done my work. And I think we were waiting to pick somebody up, or somebody was picking us up. And I was in there with Mick and a couple of others. And all of a sudden, he came on the telly. And the whole pub went quiet. And it was supposed, if you remember that pub, I can't remember what it's called, but it was obviously supposed to be a Leeds pub. Yeah. It's right opposite Elland Road, and there was always aggro between Leeds and Newcastle. But all of a sudden, he launched into that, I would love it. And the whole pub went up, Leeds and Newcastle fans. And it's one of those days, isn't it? Where were you when Kevin did that? You know, I could have easily been in a car on the way back to the northeast or wherever, but we were in that pub across the road, and it went absolutely up with emotion. And
is it the Peacock?
Yeah, that's it. The Peacock. Yeah, right opposite the ground. It looks like it looks like a sort of 70s pub. You know, it's like it looks like a council house sort of thing. You know, but it was the place went mad. You know. But
yeah,
great memories.
Some great messages coming in. Sutty says, it's the entertainers era that made me support Newcastle. Would love to see something like that happen again after the takeover. Tom Lynch, he says, 92 to 97, what an incredible 5 years. It wasn't just Newcastle itself, it was the buzz, the energy it created across Tyneside. You could feel it. And Darren, reflecting on what a lot of people had to go through, he says, like so many others, I struggled to get tickets during that era, but we'll go to Durham once or twice a week to watch training, which was great times. Billy, he says, I think Kevin had an aura given to him from Bill Shankly. I remember being drawn to Bill Shankly just as a 7-year-old. And Jeff says, fans hanging around the ground and the enthusiasm has not happened since the first season of that takeover. So yeah, lots of memories and lots of recollections. Let's look ahead to this weekend, Mick, then. Arsenal come into town, Newcastle United versus Arsenal in the Premier League. We will be covering it on the channel. Matchday Live will start at 1:30 tomorrow with the NUFC Matters team talking you through the game. It's a 2 o'clock kickoff. It's on Sky Sports. This is the third meeting, of course, between the teams. Newcastle played them twice in January. In the FA Cup, we lost 2-0. And in the league, we lost 3-0 at the Emirates. So, yeah, it's a good run of form, as Mick's already pointed out. Newcastle go into this game unbeaten in the last 5 home fixtures. 2 wins, 3 draws. And obviously, after beating West Ham, who were chasing the Champions League, this is the first chance we've had to record back-to-back Premier League wins at home for the first time this season. So, it should be interesting. Injury news, well, Newcastle are, of course, without Lascelles, Hayden, Darlow and Fraser. And Joe Willock, of course, is ineligible because Arsenal are his parent club. Yeah. Fabian Schär was back in contention. Obviously, this week he played 45 minutes in the reserves and came back with no effects from his knee injury, which was great. And Matt Ritchie was a question mark over him yesterday. Is potentially doubtful with a calf problem, but the rumours and stories that I was getting last night were that he should be okay, which is good news. I think the other news as well is people are hoping that Wilson potentially will get a start. As for Arsenal, good time to play them, possibly, because we've got, they're slap bang in the middle of a 2-legged European semi-final, which, of course, they lost the first leg 2-1 against Villarreal in Spain. Their minds will be clearly focused on that. Aubameyang obviously came off the bench in that game. Lacazette and Tierney didn't feature. So Mike Dean's refereeing on that lovely VAR system that we have in this country. Chris Kavanagh is in charge of that. To be honest, Arsenal at home, it's an interesting one, and it is a good time to play them, Mick, I think.
You sounded like teletext there, by the way.
Thanks, mate. CFAX.
You're rattling all that off. Yeah, I mean, I think 2 things. One, do we limp over the line or do we fly over the line? I think Chelsea will beat Fulham later today at 5:30. That will make it impossible. Well, it means that Fulham's final total can only be 39, which means that Newcastle are only 3 points from safety with 5 games to play. Now, what do you do in those 5 games? You know, it's virtually impossible not to get safe. It's not, it's not within the realms of possibility that they could go down, but it's pretty much done and dusted in terms of survival. So what do you do? Do you stop playing? Do you start playing the percentages? Do you nick a point here? Do you nick a point there? Or do you let the brakes off and say to yourself, right, let's have a half-decent end to the season. Let's, yes, those that we're playing, might be on the beach, so it might not mean an awful lot. But let's at least have a go in the final weeks of the season. What they don't have to do is, if they have been already and been wary of risking Wilson, don't risk Wilson. Keep Wilson for next season and beyond. If you can keep him. Now there is a question mark, but just don't let the season peter out and just. I mean, they might not have to ever pick up another point. Fulham just might lose their next 3 games and then they're essentially safe. So let's just see exactly how Steve Bruce sends them out, because I think now. You can let the handbrake off. You can say to them, right, even if we lost to Arsenal tomorrow, let's lose having a go, because in the scheme of things, it's not really going to matter. Arsenal are flaky, as you've said. They're hit and miss. Yes, we might owe them one, but I don't really transcribe to that, because I don't think we're in the same ballpark as Arsenal at this minute in time. So, let's just see exactly what happens tomorrow. But let's just not think to ourselves, if we nick a point here, if we nick a point there, let's at least try and keep the run going. Let's try and win a few games of football.
I mean, look, it's been another eventful season at Newcastle, which has been overshadowed by COVID, overshadowed by the takeover. But theoretically, depending on how many points we get between now and the end of the season, Newcastle could still finish, 15th, 16th.
Yeah.
But we'll have stayed up again. And Steve Bruce, of course, who we discussed earlier, was getting pelters, is now getting a few plaudits from people, deservedly so, for managing to turn things around. Does he deserve to stay on? Regardless of whether the takeover goes through or not, does he deserve to stay, Mick?
He deserves to stay on, Steve, because at the end of the day, he's kept Newcastle in the Premier League. Now, none of us want Newcastle's remit to be every season finishing 17th, which is exactly what the owner's remit is. But in the same way that I've come on here before and said, I think Scott Parker is a good bet for being a good manager further down the line, and maybe even at Newcastle United. If we think to ourselves that Scott Parker couldn't keep Fulham in the Premier League, we don't think that Sam Allardyce didn't keep West Brom in the Premier League, and that a combination of managers didn't keep Sheffield United in the Premier League, then Steve Bruce did keep Newcastle in the Premier League. And at this minute in time, he's above Sean Dyche in the table, and Sean Dyche is generally considered to be a very good manager. Sorry, no, not Sean Dyche, but Graham Potter at Brighton.
Graham Potter, yeah.
But he could catch Sean Dyche at Burnley as well. So, again, credit where credit's due. It's all about the long term, Steve. But then the long term is dictated not necessarily by the manager, but by the owner. So Steve Bruce could morph into, if he isn't already, a very decent manager. But if he's not given the resources, if he's not given the players, he's going to go nowhere. And as a football club, we're going to go nowhere while this guy is in charge, and why the owner has, as I say, a mantra that says, finish 17th and I'm happy. Finish in the Premier League wherever and I'm happy. As long as that is the message coming down from above, and as a result, no money's being spent and there's no investment in the football club, it doesn't matter who's in charge. So Steve Bruce more than likely will be in charge first game of next season. But sadly, the fact of the matter is, so will the owner. And it's not until the owner changes, it's not until the philosophy of the football club vis-a-vis the attitude of the owner changes, will there ever be a difference at Newcastle. We will be forever a football club that is surviving, just surviving, keep surviving. It's physically impossible to do anything other than survive if you haven't got the players, if you haven't got the backing, and if you haven't got the philosophy from above that says we want to do things with this football club.
David Reed says, would it not be better for Bruce to walk away in the summer with his head held high?
There's an argument for that, very much an argument for that. And I touched upon it earlier, didn't I, when I said the one thing that Pardew did, yes, he had good times, but he also had some indifferent times. But he managed to put one over on Ashley by managing to walk away before he got sacked. And every manager in the world, Steve, knows they're going to be sacked sooner or later. The old business about there's only so many things sure in life, taxes and sacking. If you're a football manager, he's going to get the bullet sooner or later. And he's gone through what he's gone through. But I think the guy, as I've said before, I like him as a person. I respect the fact that he's a football man, he's a proper football man, and that he wants to make it work. I think if you were a manager who didn't have Newcastle at heart, and I do believe he has Newcastle at heart, it would be a fantastic thing to be able to do. I think if you were from anywhere else in the world, you would stick two fingers up at Mike Ashley and those fans that have had a go at you for the last however long, and say, see you later, there you are, you're in the Premier League, I did that. If you're Steve Bruce, I think you care enough about the football club and you're respectful enough of the football club that you want to keep trying to make it work. And he must know that if new owners might get rid of him, Steve. None of us know. None of us know what's around the corner. But I think he will, while he has the opportunity, want to try and make it work, want to try and make Newcastle better, because I do think he cares about Newcastle. So let's wait and see. But it looks increasingly likely that he will be in charge next season, and let's see what happens.
Yeah, and it's like I said, better the devil you know, I suppose. There's no guarantees that you're going to be able to bring in, especially under Ashley, a good manager. His track record for appointing managers hasn't been very good at all, and ultimately we could end up with another Joe Kinnear.
And what's a good manager, Steve? I mean, we've had this discussion as well. I mean, over the years they've been through and gone down every road. They've gone down the superstar manager, they've gone down the homegrown manager, they've gone down the person who cares, they've gone down the track record, they've gone down, since 1991 or whatever, they've gone down every possibility. And there's no guarantee, absolutely no guarantee. I mean, once upon a time, because he's been talked about, of course, Jose was an absolute surefire certainty. When he was at Chelsea, when he was at Sporting, wherever he was, the guy was absolute gold dust. Now, he can't get a club. He can't find a club. It's a fickle business, football. Your flavour of the month 1 minute. Jurgen Klopp a year ago, honestly, you'd think if he touched a can of Stella, it would turn into a gold ingot. Now he can't win a game to save his life. He's got the same players. Yes, there's no one in at Anfield, but there's been no one in at any other football club. Try and explain that to me. Try and explain to me what's happened at Liverpool Football Club, because I thought they were going to dominate English football for 10 years. Now they're an also ran. How does that work?
Yeah, as you say, football just doesn't make sense at times, and you never ever know what is round the corner. Mark says Martinez hasn't renewed his contract at Belgium. Him and Jones have got a connection, of course.
Easy story to write, easy suggestion to come up with. Of course it is, absolutely. But is there a guarantee? No, not at all. I mean, and as we keep saying, it doesn't matter whether it's Martinez, Mourinho, Steve Bruce, Mother Teresa, God Almighty. They've got to work with Mike Ashley. They've got to work with an owner who doesn't have the club at heart. Doesn't have the club at heart. So, on top of, can they be good managers? Do they want to be managers of Newcastle United? Do they want to go to St James's Park, which once upon a time people would fall over to go to Tyneside and work for those supporters? Now, going back to the old poison chalice adage, you just don't know. The word in football is probably now, just don't touch it with a barge pole until there's new owners.
I certainly think they suffered after the way Rafa left, because because somebody like Rafa is so connected in football and his team around him, that anybody who was initially approached for that job for Newcastle would have said, well, why did you leave? There wouldn't have been any glowing endorsements for Mike Ashley's way of running a football club from Rafa or his team. But even before that, Steve, I mean, and then even now, I mean, think about the influence, think about the connections, think about the friends that Steve Bruce has in British football. Alan Shearer. Steve Bruce has been an iconic figure, whatever you think of him, has been an iconic figure in English football for 20, 30 years. I talked about the Cochrane story. I've talked about, the man has got respect beyond respect within the game of football because of what he's done as a manager, what he did as a player, and what he is as an individual. I talked before about the entertainers and that team. They were all proper people. He's a proper person, Steve Bruce. Whether people fell out with him because they thought he was a bad manager is up to them. But his standing in the game is good, in the same way as you say that Rafa's standing in the game was almost impeccable. But there've been managers before that as well, KK, brought into Newcastle for all the wrong reasons under Ashley and fell foul of Ashley. So, until he goes, until that football club changes in terms of ownership, it doesn't really matter who comes in and who doesn't come in, or what or what philosophy is assumed and isn't. It's just going to be a mess. Yeah, it is. Paul Oxley says, as always, Mick, great listening. Thanks for that, mate. And quick prediction for tomorrow then, Mick.
I'll just be interested to see the way they play. I will be interested. I think, as I said before, they've got no reason now not to be a bit more expansive, not to have a bit more of a go. They're going to survive. Arsenal are vulnerable. Arsenal aren't really in a position to dictate, but they are, they're a dangerous side. But I'll be more interested in how Newcastle approach the game rather than whether they win the game or not, because I think that'll be a pointer as to what we do in the next 5 games. There's no reason why they shouldn't have a bit of a go. There's no reason why they shouldn't attack Arsenal. Joe Willock, I would love to see him play and score against his former club. The only problem being, of course, that would probably put another 5 million on his price tag. And as it stands, it's probably gone up a few quid. But I would love to see the young man signed. As I said, I think he has done more than anyone in the last few games. A big favour to Newcastle, and we have a debt of gratitude to Joe Willock, regardless of whether he stays or not. And tomorrow should be like the Joe Willock afternoon, because his parent club and his foster club are meeting at St James's, and it should be the Joe Willock afternoon.
Yeah, join me tomorrow 1:30 for Matchday Live to cover that game. Look forward to seeing everybody then. I am going to come back on this afternoon at 3:00. I'm going to have an interview with Joey Barnett about his book, which is a South London Borstal Boys Tales. Interesting character. Joey turned his life around. His book takes you on the highs and lows of his journey. So I'm going to have an hour off, and then I'm going to come back and talk to Joey for an hour. So if you've got any questions for him, please come on. Mick, hope to have you on in a couple of weeks' time, mate. You take care.
Yeah, and you, son. See you later.
Bye-bye, mate.
Bye-bye.
Head back with your critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again, but it's the only way